everybody, welcome back to the shop. This time I'm going to start a new project, and this is the 5th annual Woodworkers Fighting Cancer project build. Every year since 2010, my buddy Mark Spagnuolo has been raising money for cancer charities by building projects and having people build along and contributing towards a charity for every project that's built. Now this year, Mark has put together a great design for a kids' table and chairs. And he's got the full plans located right on his website. Really well done plans. I've actually got them downloaded here onto my tablet. It's got everything I need from a cut list to a cut diagram, because the whole thing is made out of a single sheet of plywood. So he's got it very clearly laid out exactly what you need to do. He also has templates, and you can either print out the full size template, and my wife's school happened to have one of those big blotter printers, so I was able to print out the whole thing. Or you can just print them out in regular 8.5 by 11 sheets, and they're alignment grids. You can tape it all together and make the patterns that you need. So really everything you need to build this is all located at woodworkersfightingcancer.com. For me, I really like the project. I like obviously the cause, but I thought it would be really fun to build this project, not only because it's just a single sheet of plywood, but I don't get to work with plywood that often. And it's not that there's anything wrong with working with plywood with hand tools. And I thought maybe it would be a good opportunity to show you that plywood is no different than solid wood when it comes to working it entirely by hand. Now, the biggest issue I have with plywood is in my small shop, you can see this sheet of plywood takes up a lot of space and there's not a lot of room to work. So the first thing I need to do is start breaking this down. The cutting diagram helpfully breaks the sheet up into 4 pieces. So that's my first step, is to knock this big 4x8 sheet down into quadrants. And just get up on the bench in order to get all the way across the board and cut it up. I'm using a rougher cut saw here just to knock things down to manageable sizes. With these quadrants, I can now begin to lay out the actual parts and cut them into smaller pieces. Now here, I'm using my panel saw. It's a finer pitch saw. And you can see it leaves a cleaner cut, but more importantly, it also leaves a cleaner backside without a lot of tearing. Getting a finer cut now is going to save me time when it comes to planing everything to final dimension. I add just a little bit of extra, about a 1/16 of an inch extra between the parts to account for the saw curve, but you don't need a lot when you're hand sawing here. You can get very close to your finished dimensions while working with a hand saw. There's not really much to this, just saw to the line and break everything down into its constituent parts till you end up with a nice stack of parts ready to be sized with a hand plane. Once all the parts are broken down to size, I now need to plane them down to the final dimensions. I'm working on the aprons here, but I'm going to follow the same process for all the parts. First, I've got to start with a flat edge, so I will joint one edge. And you can see the apron's a little tougher because of the cross grain situation, so a sharp blade and a light cut is necessary here. Now with one flat edge, I'll use my marking gauge to knife in the parallel edge. And it's a good idea to mark this on both faces. This not only gives you a guide to plane 2, but it also severs the fiber. And in this cross grain situation, it will be necessary to get a nice clean cut so you don't get that fraying. Now I'm just going to plane down to those lines. Again, a sharp blade is really necessary here, but that knife line makes a huge difference. Here you can see I'm sneaking up on that knife line, and the severed fibers make for a nice clean cut. Now with 2 parallel edges, I'll take it over to the shooting board and I'm going to clean up one end. Now I can flip this board around and go ahead and shoot it to final length of 22 inches. With one board perfectly sized, I can use it to lay out all the others to get exact length. With that line there, I can either saw away the waste or just go right back over the shooting board and work my way right down to my pencil line. This will ensure that I've got not only perfectly square parts, but identically sized parts. With the aprons done, I'll switch over to the legs. This time I just need one jointed edge that I can reference a bevel gauge off of. The legs are parallelograms with 5-degree angles on each end. So I'll set a bevel to 5 degrees and then mark a line on the end of the board. I just use my handsaw at the bench hook to saw this out. It's not imperative that you nail this angle right now. Certainly it's easier if you get close with the handsaw. You could set up a miter box to do this, but again, I just don't feel that it's necessary because the precision step comes next at the shooting board. I've created a 5-degree fence here, and I've just lined up my leg and shoot the end exactly to 5 degrees. Also cleans it up nicely. Now, if I put the apron in place and run the line across, I mark the length of the shorter half of these laminated legs. So once I saw that to length and go ahead and shoot that end again, and of course shoot the opposite end so that now I've got a perfectly S6S board, I can see how my legs are going to come together. And it's important to mark the glue faces because you have left legs and you have right legs. You need to make sure that you put the glue on the right surfaces so you don't end up with a bunch of left legs. Now, the glue up is pretty straightforward here. Just glue it all together with that one jointed edge. I can press the boards down onto the bench, referencing on that jointed edge to keep the boards nice and aligned, and clamp it up, just making sure that it doesn't slide along the long axis and mess up that half flap we're creating up top. And here's the way to check it with my apron. While the legs are in the clamps, I'm going to move on to the grooves and the table box. I'll start by marking everything out with a knife gauge so that I get a cleanly severed face grain. And with a plow planning, I always start on the far edge and work my way back. This ensures that I stay inside my lines. If I start on the near edge and work my way forward, there's always a chance that the plow plane could stray a little bit along the length of the apron. It's just a good idea to take it slowly until the groove is established. And once it's established, you can kind of kick it into high gear and plane it down till the depth stop stops the plane from cutting. And you can see how I get a nice clean surface with that knife gauge marking it out. Now I'll use pinch sticks with the apron all assembled just to determine the inner dimensions from the bottom of the groove to the bottom of the groove. And I can use this pinch stick to transfer those dimensions over to my bottom panel piece and work that down to final size. And I'm just going to use a straight edge here. Because this panel floats, it doesn't have to be exactly to the right size. In fact, you want a little bit of play in the bottom panel. And then just as before, I'm going to plane right down to my lines and get this bottom panel to the exact size that I need. Now I'll grab my knife gauge again and I'll lay in the rabbet that fits into the grooves. Again, the knife gauge is key, especially in these across grain situations. Now I've got a finisher plane here with a fence set and the depth stop set, which makes this pretty idiot proof. Again, starting on the far side and working back just to make sure we stay in our lines, but then kick it into high gear and plow this rabbet down until the depth stop stops at cutting. You want the finished tongue to be 1/4 inch. So I've got a 1/2 inch of material to remove here. As you get close, it's a good idea to keep the apron handy so you can make sure you get a nice snug fit on that groove. Looks good. Now I'm going to go ahead and put everything together with the screws. So I'll use a scratch awl to mark the locations and my egg beater with a countersink bit to pre-drill the holes for my screws. The entire table box is just put together with a couple of screws at each corner. Now before you attach the final side, make sure you slide that bottom panel in, and that completes the table box. I'll plug the holes later before I move on to finish. I'll take the leg blanks out of the clamps and grab my pattern and transfer the shape onto each blank. Now, if you don't have any experience with a turning saw, this project is going to be great because you're going to really build that skill over the next couple of legs and chair parts. The key is to keep that saw as square as possible so you end up with a square cut across the thickness. Nice long and slow strokes are going to do you better than short kind of phonetic strokes. The saw will cut cleaner and allow the sawdust to clear, therefore cutting faster. Now you'll end up with a couple of legs that are roughly to shape. Now you want to come back and clean them up. And I've got this compass plane that'll work great for this. You can certainly use a spoke shave, but the compass plane makes quick work of it. I start by setting the radius a little bit more severe than the actual shape I want, and a rough cut allows me to quickly shape it close to the line. Now I'm going to change the radius of the sole to exactly match the final radius of the pattern. Lock that in place, lighten up the cut, and smooth everything out and fair that curve exactly to the line. Once I kind of get full length shavings, I pay real close attention to my line and work right down to it. With the legs shaped, I'll go over to the drill press and I'm going to drill the holes for the connector bolts. The location of these came right off the template. Then you can use an alignment peg, and setting the legs 2 inches in from the end, you can transfer the locations for the holes. Then I'm going to grab a 3/8 inch bit and drill the through holes into the case itself. I'll assemble the table a little bit later. I've got a little bit more work to do on everything before I do that. It's time to move on to the chairs. And this is a lot of repetition, although the curves that we'll be cutting out here with the turning saw are just a wee bit more convoluted. But really, once you get into a rhythm, you've got 4 of these to cut out, it goes pretty quickly. Now for these center cuts, I'm just going to drill out at the corners. You can either drill out at all 4 corners or just 1 corner, so you can thread the turning saw blade through and cut out the interior part. Now, the original plan calls for nesting 2 chairs together in the plywood in order to get the best yield. You may find that you run into some trouble making the cut between them that separates them. The average throat of a turning saw like this, it does not give you enough reach to cut all the way to the middle. Even if you come back and cut from the other side, which I've already done here, there's still a little spot in the middle. So let me show you a little trick to extend the reach of your turning saw. Okay, right there, the crossbar has bottomed out, or pretty close, and I've got about 1.5 inches here of material still to remove. So I will turn the saw, and now I've got more reach. And I can angle across. And I can cut all the way through and connect that line. And once they're all cut out, it's time to clean everything up. Obviously, as close you can saw to the line, the less work you're going to have to do later. But this is surprisingly easy if you've got the right tools for the job. See, even though there are a lot of curves here, just like with the legs, I can use this handy dandy compass plane to help me out. The curves along the back are all a single radius. So I can set my compass plane and cut this out. It also happens to match the radius in the front, and I can cut this leg. The top section, I can do the majority of that with the block plane, which leaves me with just a little bit of cleanup along the back here, underneath and inside. That can be done with spoke shaves, files, and rasps. Once you've got everything smoothed out and rounded over, it's time to assemble the chair. And the seat, the stretcher, the back are all attached the same way. They use these connector bolts that go into a threaded insert. And each one of these connector bolts is flanked on either side by a 3/8 inch dowel peg. So I've got quite a few holes to drill, 3 in each one of these locations. Now, to define those locations on your sides, you want to use your template again. That's what these holes on the template are for. I just lay it over top of my chair sides, and you can use a drill bit. I have these alignment points that can just slide through and precisely locate where the holes go. At the same time, you can use these templates to lay out the locations on the ends of the stretcher, the seat, etc. The template has a dotted line drawing that shows the shape of that board, and you can just drop it right down on top of it, and from the other side you can mark those locations. In order to make this a little bit more precise, I used a marking gauge on all of the ends of my pieces, and making sure that I mark from the same face on both sides, I just put a little knife line in there, and I was able to darken that up so I could see a little bit better. Then when I'm kind of looking through the window of my little holes here, I can line up that marking gauge line and ensure that my part isn't twisted at all. And then just transfer the hole through with a drill bit so that I'm ready to start drilling.
At each connection point there are 3 holes. The center hole is a through hole for the connector bolt. The flanking holes need to be drilled to a 1/2 inch deep, so I use blue tape as a depth stop. Both here and also on the seats, I need blue tape for a depth stop for the threaded insert, which just goes in with an Allen key, and I sink it just below the surface. Now I'll install the peg holes on the seats and the slats. Make sure to get all that dust out of there. And then just hammer the pegs in. I don't really need glue here, but you could use glue if you want. Now it's just a matter of assembling. Sliding everything together, the pegs hold the pieces in place and prevent any kind of twisting. And then everything is secured with those connected bolts that go into the threaded inserts. Flip the thing over and repeat on the other side. So the whole chair is actually knocked downable just by removing these connector bolts. And we've got 2 chairs and a table.
So once you've got everything sized to its final dimensions, I need to come back and round over all the edges. Remember, this is a kid's table and chair project, so I can't have any sharp edges. For that matter, I don't even want chamfers. I want it rounded and soft. So for the straight stuff, like the tabletop and the box and things like that, it's just a simple matter of starting with the chamfer and then just kind of rolling that around. I'll start really low, almost parallel to the surface, kind of crank it up a little bit, make another pass, up again, and I'm just rolling the plane through an arc back and forth to create a gentle roundover. And then I'll come back after that shaped with a little bit of sandpaper and just kind of soften it, maybe eliminate any of those facets, and certainly make sure that there's no rough spots on the edge. As far as the amount of roundover that you choose, a 1/4 inch roundover, even an 1/8 inch roundover will work, just enough to soften things up. A 1/4 inch roundover will make everything look very, very soft. The 1/8 inch will make it soft to the touch so that it's not sharp, but also give you a little bit more of a severe kind of architectural look to the table, which is what I want to go for. I don't want sweeping curves on it, just kind of subtle 1/8 inch curves. So it really doesn't take very long to get to that point. Now when it comes to all these curved surfaces, that's a little bit of a different story. And using the jack plane maybe would work, but it's so much easier to just grab a spoke shave and do the exact same process by forming the chamfer and then rolling the shave up and down in order to round over those surfaces. About to move on to finishing. Just want to do a couple of last minute things, probably run over everything with some 220 grit sandpaper, just to make sure that any rough spots are taken care of so that the finish lays down nicely. For the finish, I'm going to do a two-tone thing with this great kind of bright Kelly green spray paint on the bottom of the tabletop and the legs, as well as the side pieces and the chairs. For the slats and for the tabletop themselves, I'm going to go with a clear coat finish. I'm going to use a nice shellac because since it's pretty much non-toxic and child-proof. And the end result I think is going to look really nice. It's probably a little bit nicer than one would leave a child's table, but since I'm going to end up donating this, I'll leave that up to the parents of the children who decide to destroy the nice cherry top sometime in the future. They can refinish it and paint it with something from there. Once the finish has had time to cure properly, you can reassemble everything. And that brings this build to a close. All told, I used 4 coats of shellac on the natural cherry parts, 2 coats of green spray paint, and then 2 top coats of shellac on all of the green parts. And I've got a finish that's just beautiful. It looks like a fine piece of furniture. So yeah, it may be a little bit fancier than your typical kids project, but I think it looks really beautiful and I'm really happy with it. As a last little bit of inspiration, I decided to spice up the inside, and I decoupaged some comic books in here. I got some Scooby-Doo comic books and lined the bottom with them and just use a decoupage paste to put it all in there and then seal that in with a couple more top coats of shellac on top of it. So it's kind of a neat surprise inside of the case itself. So that brings us to a close on this year's Woodworkers Fighting Cancer charity project. I want to thank Mark and Nicole Spagnolo for putting this whole thing together. They put together a great design, but more importantly, they've got a great cause going on here. As I understand it, they've raised more than $20,000 this year, which I think is a personal best for this particular campaign. So congratulations to them both. I was proud to be a part of it. On a much more sober note, as I was applying the finish to this table, I got a visit from my next door neighbor of the last 10 years. And just came to find out that her husband, Bob, has been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. And we don't expect to have him with us too much longer. So I want to dedicate this build to Bob. You've been a fantastic neighbor, and this winter, I will be shoveling the sidewalks, buddy. So hang in there, and we'll be thinking about you. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to everybody who participated in this charity build. And again, thank you to Mark and Nicole Spagnolo for organizing the whole thing. We'll see you next time.